This is episode 117 of the Death to Tyrants podcast. Hey guys, a quick note on today's episode. I did this interview with Austin Petersen last week, and since then, he's tweeted something that got a lot of reaction. So if you're wondering, why the hell don't you ask him about that one tweet, Buck? Well, it's because this interview happened before that one tweet. So if we get to talk again, then I can ask him. All right, enjoy the show, guys. Hey guys, let me tell you about the sponsor for today's show, and that is Lucky Guy Bakery over at luckyguybakery.com. The brownies are insanely delicious, and they make excellent gifts. They do little gift boxes over there. The logo is awesome. The packaging is really well done, and each one has a handwritten gift note, a very personalized touch. And obviously with the lockdown and COVID mess that's been going on, you're missing a lot of birthday parties and graduation parties. This is a really cool way to send gifts to someone, let them know you're thinking about them. It's from luckyguybakery.com. They've got an amazing selection of brownies over there, starting at only $22, and that's before you get the discount from being a fan of this show. You get 20% off just by putting in DTTP at checkout. They're award-winning brownies. They've been featured on the Today Show. They're one of the top 5 bakeries in Indiana. Lucky Guy Bakery is, according to Yelp. They got best mail order brownies as well. Obviously, in 2020, you know some of your family members and friends want the gluten-free ones and vegan options. Well, they've got all of that. So go to luckyguybakery.com, enter code DTTP at checkout. You will get 20% off. Guys, let's support these small businesses that support libertarian podcasts like this one. Once again, luckyguybakery.com, promo code DTTP at checkout. Let's get to the show.
The crushing weight of the tyrant's passage had left nothing unmarked.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram wrath. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Oh, what's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Death to Tyrants podcast. As always, I am your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson, coming to you out of Austin, Texas. And welcome to all of you new listeners. There's a ton of you, so thank you for coming aboard, being part of the family here. I wanted to talk more about the culture wars like we did last week with the incredible, my president, Mr. Jeff Deist was on the show. Got a lot of good feedback from that one. Jeff's always good, isn't he? One of the listeners said, I could listen to Jeff read a grocery list, and I concur. I think I could too. However, today we've got another great guest on the show, and that's Austin Petersen. He's been very good on the culture war issues as of late, and a lot of you know him back from 2016. He ran to be the presidential nominee of the Libertarian Party. I think things might have turned out a bit different had he won that. And we talk about that today. Austin's been everywhere. He worked for Judge Andrew Napolitano's show. He's got his own consulting firm. He started the libertarianrepublic.com, a wonderful site featuring a lot of news articles. This guy, he's got his own morning show in Missouri. This guy does a lot. I'm very thankful that he was able to join us here on the show. I asked him some of the same stuff that I asked Jeff Deist last week, and I just want some unique perspectives. Maybe it's some similar takes, maybe some different stuff, but we've got the leftists crying out for libertarians to go defend the protesters up in Portland. We've got this stuff with BLM and Antifa, and where does the LP fit into all of this? We get into all of that today with our guest, and I'm excited to be here with Austin Petersen, all the way from Independence, Missouri, now on the Death to Tyrants podcast. Austin Petersen, welcome to the show. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. I tend to think a lot of my audience will be familiar with you and what you've done. But for anyone unfamiliar, talk about what you do now and where you come from politically, running for president and everything in between.
Sure. So, long story. I'll try and sum it up as easy as possible. So, currently in 2020, I am the host of the KWOS Morning Show program, which is headquartered in Jefferson City, Missouri. So, I operate out of the state capitol here in Mo, and I do a 6 to 9 a.m. sort of the morning drive talk show 5 days a week to discuss the news of the day, local, statewide, national politics, and news. So I'd like to try and mix it up. You got to have a little, crazy Florida man story from time to time and make them laugh. But yeah, mostly news and politics, elections, etc. And I started my political career just as a volunteer. It would have been back in 2007. I had, been introduced to libertarian ideas a little bit before that, but I was very inspired by Congressman Ron Paul's 2008 presidential campaign. So, sort of working my way through the think tank world in Washington, D.C. for a few years. And then I did a stint as a producer for Judge Andrew Napolitano's show Freedom Watch on the Fox Business Network. And then after that, a little bit more DC skullduggery, mostly just trying to advance libertarian causes wherever I thought I could, sort of effectively move the needle in whatever, institution, organization that I was affiliated with. And then starting my own business, starting my own for-profit libertarian venture, a little, media company, publishing firm enterprise called Stonegate on the side. And the Libertarian Republic News website is mine. It's been around. It operates. It doesn't take money from billionaires. It sinks or swims based on a free market, which is what what libertarians claim to believe in. And so now I host my radio show and I run my news website and I sort of try and pump up causes that I believe in and candidates that I believe in and ballot measures that I believe in and just try and be sort of obviously I ran for president in 2016 and 2018 for the U.S. Senate. And, I treat those as footnotes. Honestly, is some of the more important work that I've actually done, which is, the hard work. You work hard in campaigns, don't get me wrong. But I mean, a lot of the sort of bloody, behind the closed doors work that needs to be done is really what, gave me the credibility to be able to mount a presidential run, and have any sort of name ID. It was all that time that I spent, sort of in the trenches advocating for a cause that I am deeply passionate about. And I think I kind of look at myself as a sort of, if you look at a business, you could say I'm the sales department, right? I work in marketing and sales, and my job is to advertise our ideas, that come from our scholars and our, movement leaders and thought leaders. And so I try and, be if I'm not at the spearhead of advancing our ideas, then I'm advancing whoever is spearheading our ideas so that we can try and leapfrog ahead into the future, and find ourselves in a more libertarian world. And that's really what I hope we can, move towards, even though it does seem to be tending in the other direction.
A lot of hardcore libertarians look back at 2016, the presidential nomination process and the nominees. It's kind of a mixed bag, we'll say. How would we look back upon things had you won the nomination? What things come to mind that might have been different from how it turned out?
Oh, that's a really tough question, man, because those are such personal things and it always dwells in hypotheticals. It's kind of like the same, what if the South had won the Civil War? What would the world be like, right? So it's tough to really, say anything with, certainty. But what I can say is that I do believe that the political wins in 2016 were of a mind where the American people wanted someone who had Trumpish qualities, but it wasn't necessarily Donald Trump that they had in mind as to who they wanted in 2016. So I don't think that I would have won the presidency, barring some unforeseen circumstances that would have driven the election into the House of Representatives. And then I'm just so charming that Paul Ryan in the House of Representatives says, oh, I like Austin Petersen better than Donald Trump. But I doubt that would have happened because Donald Trump has a lot of money and can buy things like support. But what I think the most realistic projection could have been an appearance in the debates. So my hope at the time was to make libertarianism look normal to normies, rather than the stripping and dancing on the stage and the selling of heroin to 5-year-olds and the sort of libertine-ish marketing plan that the Libertarians went with. They went with a left libertarian, sort of liberal, kind of Gary Johnson style candidate. Even Bill Weld sort of represented that, his vice presidential candidate. I thought a solid, conservative behaving, if not necessarily conservative acting, because I'm not a social conservative, and I think even fiscal conservatives are not fiscal conservatives. But I mean, the point is that I think that people look at a president, they want competency. They want somebody that had the pizzazz of Trump, the showbiz of Trump, who could get a message out and who could really destroy on social media and to captivate the media's attention, because that's what I do. I'm an expert at that. But the Libertarians, we tend to be nerds, right? So the engineers, who are the types who are not very social, I won't say asocial, but I will say a lot of Libertarians are antisocial. And so in 2016, you had the people who were the very hardcore pragmatists that saw, they wanted to play it safe with Gary Johnson. And then you had the people who wanted to make a spectacle of themselves and to be embarrassing about our principles rather than make a spectacle of yourselves and kick some statist ass at the same time. And, to be unimpeachable. I mean, Gary was in essence impeachable because he was easy to write off. But what, captivated Ron Paul supporters, what captivated Bernie Sanders supporters, what captivated Obama supporters was that there was a youthful exuberance and energy and a playfulness and a mischievousness that I think was lacking in ultimately the campaign that we saw. And that mischievous, that all existed within Donald Trump. He was unafraid to fight Hillary Clinton like a cage match, like a UFC fighter, and to get in and to clinch and to do what was necessary. People thought Hillary Clinton was a bloody politician, but Donald Trump got into the arena and the blood flowed, from anyone who stepped into that arena to take on Donald Trump. He just eviscerated them. I mean, yeah. And Libertarians also didn't like that I would praise Donald Trump's tactics because they would get confused with praising the tactics of a person with the principles of a person or the positions of a person. And that is a major failure, but that's a human failure. It's not necessarily a libertarian trait. It is a human failure. It's to not understand these subtle nuances and to engage in black or white thinking and to think if he says something nice about what Donald Trump is doing, well, he's a fascist. He's he's not really a libertarian. He's a Donald Trumper trying to take over our party. But a lot of that too is convenience. Narratives like that can be latched onto by people who want to make a lot of money off of a campaign, who don't give a damn about libertarianism or libertarian principles. And there's always barnacles like that attach themselves to candidates and causes because they think they're going to win and they'll get a nice healthy fee off of that. And a lot of people did from the Gary Johnson campaign. So if that sounds like sour grapes, it's just because, it was a very sour wine that was served to us in 2016, I would say.
Yes, I would too. In this episode, and in a few previous to this one, I'm kind of focusing on the culture war that we find ourselves in right now. And it's an area that a lot of libertarians aren't used to walking through because it's not just cut and dry monetary policy or drug policy. There's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of size, a lot of language usage that is manipulated and I think can be tricky to navigate. I'd first like to get your thoughts on what you are seeing right now in this country, and do you see culture wars going on, and where should libertarians stand in all of this craziness?
They are. I mean, the challenge is massive because the problem is complex. You have a psychological form of warfare that's being engaged in and has been, being engaged in for a long time. And you have the political wars that are being engaged in, and you have the ballot wars that are going on, right? And now, in some cases, you have actual conflict. In some cases, armed going on in places around the country. You're in Austin, Texas. I mean, you just had an incident there the other day, of which the details are still unraveling and unfurling. Right. But that hasn't stopped many of our libertarian compatriots from already jumping to conclusions and making judgments, very hasty judgments, I might add, about what happened at the event in Austin, Texas. Another incident which occurred recently, which some might point to and say, hey, Austin, here's an example of your hypocrisy, was the armed lawyers in St. Louis, the McCloskeys, who were defending their property with firearms, for example, right? This is a question of a castle doctrine, right? They were on their own private property. I think it should be fairly clear and cut and dried. Once you get out into the public and you're talking about protesting in a street, a public venue, and a highway, and you're blocking traffic, that adds a layer of complexity onto it that is not the same as an incident which occurs at someone's private residence. But again, these are subtleties and nuances that are very difficult for people because you emotionally sort of want to latch onto a narrative because it solves the problem of having to do any thinking. People outsource the narratives to their tribes. So whichever tribe you feel more comfortable with has a ready-made package of PDFs, YouTube videos, and URLs to back up, whatever their preordained conclusion is or should be, right? And we're libertarians, unfortunately, because we don't have the kind of institutional support that other ideologies have, although we do have some institutions out there, or maybe perhaps we're not good at, as a movement, seeking out good information before we make decisions. But then, of course, there's the problem of collective action. Being so highly individualist, such as we are, if we were to arrive at a proper conclusion for advancing some of the principles that we would like to see, what would we do about it, right? It's like you've got the condom, but can you do the job? You know what I mean? It's I would hesitate to grant authority or power to some of the people that I agree with on policy principles. There are people who I agree with. Maybe Joe Jorgensen, for example. I still don't know exactly who I'm going to vote for president, and it's because I hesitate to grant anybody that power, maybe, or authority. And certainly I feel like more and more that I either should just vote for people that I think are going to be the silliest candidate in terms of ridiculousness, in which case perhaps a libertarian vote may suffice, or really withhold my support for those who, unless it's for someone who really stands out and that I can really believe in again. But at the moment, the leadership is, shall we say, lacking.
Let me tell you about a sponsor for today's episode, and that is Zippix Toothpicks. I can't stop with these things. When someone wants to sponsor your podcast and you already use their product, it's going to be a good time. I love Zippix Toothpicks. Remember the toothpicks as a child you would get with the cinnamon flavor? Well, these are like that, but a lot better. These are the adult version of those. Lots of good flavors and 2 milligrams of nicotine in each toothpick. How good is that? They've got the peppermint watermelon. That's my favorite. They've got a whiskey flavor, a clove flavor, and they're all very affordable. Well, since they want to support this show, and since you listen to this show, you're going to get 10% off with promo code DTTP at checkout. So now you've got no excuse. When you're out and about at dinner and you've got that craving afterwards, don't get up and be rude and leave the people sitting there wondering where you're going. Sit there with your Zippix toothpick. They taste amazing, your breath will smell good, and you've got that great nicotine buzz that you're looking for. I love these Zippix toothpicks. They were started by pharmacists, and I can't say enough about them. Honestly, I use them all day long. I love them. Join the numerous smokers who have tried everything and found Zippix as the most effective, affordable nicotine substitute available. It's especially affordable since you love the Death to Tyrants podcast, because you, my friends, will get 10% off. Go to zippixtoothpicks.com. That's ZIPPIX, toothpicks.com. Enter code DTTP at checkout. Get 10% off. You'll thank me later, and then I'll say, no, thank you for supporting Zippix and this podcast. Well, that was a perfect segue, and you didn't even realize it. What did you think of Joe Jorgensen? And we'll add in the official LP tweeting about BLM and her statement that libertarians must be actively anti-racist.
I really don't think that Joe Jorgensen knew exactly what she was doing when she was saying it. So I don't think that she was actively trying to align herself with the left or trying to endorse Marxism, as some people have accused her of. I think that's being hyperbolic. I do believe that she fell into a trap that was very carefully laid trap, that was a minefield, which was, placed in our path by left-wing socialists, left socialists, and some of them who maybe I sympathize with libertarian ideas every once in a while, maybe as much as, a conservative or a Republican might. But that minefield was the Overton window and the use of language to manipulate the debate and to this is, what do we call this? The dialectic, right? Essentially what leftists have been doing for over a century now is to frame a debate in such a way so as to be able to paint anyone who disagrees with a nice broad brush, whichever that may be, which is, they have 4 or 5 broad brushes that the left likes to use: racist, sexist, misogynist, et cetera, et cetera. You could go on and on. Nazi, fascist, whatever you want to say. And so by saying the phrase the way that she said it, I very casually just thought to myself, oh, this is a Marxist phrase for a very specific set of ideals and policy papers that the left have been writing for decades now, which is led to things like cancel culture and led to things like, people, I'm trying to think of something, another example other than cancel culture, but it's given the left a very easy, manipulable culture. It's easy to get people on board with an idea when the idea that you're advancing sounds unimpeachable. Libertarians are not really good at doing this in order to advance our ideas, to have ideas accepted by mainstream society, because, again, we have a lot of engineers, but we don't have very good salesmen. And I can say in one example in my history of activism where I was able to successfully do this was that we had the 2008, 2010, something like that, end the Fed rallies, so ending the Federal Reserve System, which I'm a big fan of this idea, right? But we had these groups across the United States that were going to protest at our Federal Reserve systems, right? It was a bunch of Ron Paul supporters. But I convinced all of the heads of those meetup groups at the time to change the name of the rally from End the Fed and wearing black shirts and white print and looking all scary to Sunlight into the Federal Reserve. And it really wasn't long after that the Sunshine and the Federal Reserve Act, Federal Reserve audits, actually started picking up more votes in the actual Federal House of Representatives, almost as if what was happening across the country was impacting, politically what was happening in Washington, D.C. I don't want to give myself all the credit for that. There were a lot of other people who were involved in those as well. But I was the person who convinced the people to change the name. And in changing it into Sunlight into the Federal Reserve, all of a sudden the acceptance and the interest in the project became much, I think it tripled in terms of size and productivity, what we were raising in money and what number of people we could get out to events, just from that simple change. So when the left creates an organization called Black Lives Matter, it's unimpeachable. And if you say anything else, or if you say all lives matter, which should be unimpeachable, it's not. Because the left has already successfully captured that field. They've captured that territory. They have that ground. It's like Gettysburg. You don't want to climb that hill, Mr. Lee. It's a bad idea to cross across open fields with cannons, and you're out of artillery, but the libertarians will, in some cases cross these fields, and some of them will be cancel culture, and some of them may go. I've seen some libertarians go out, and people who call themselves libertarians, and embrace white nationalism or white supremacism to go down to get caught in the left's trap by engaging in identity politics. And then once you engage in the identity politics and you start to buy into all of that stuff, all that claptrap, then they got you. Because if you're a white person who engages in ethnopolitics, you're done, right? So you can't win that game because it's the white supremacy game eventually. Well, as soon as you step foot into it. So it's a tough row for people who are libertarians, who are ostensibly a majority of them white males, and it puts us on our back feet. And some libertarians want to play that identity politics game, but they think that if they play it left wing enough, if they play it lefty enough, and they show if they try and hide their white superiority complexes and their desires to be to help minorities, they try and couch it in the sort of Gary Johnson-esque style politics. well, ultimately they're never taken seriously because they don't have the spine or the backbone or the inner aggression that is required to get into a arena and fight like men like Donald Trump do, because they're not men like Donald Trump are or women like Donald Trump are. They're mostly weak, I would say, if I'm to be kind, I would say they were pacifist anarchists to a large degree, meaning that they don't have the spine or the backbone or the willingness or even the ideological underpinnings to get into a battle that they could actually win. Some of them think they'll tack themselves onto left liberalism and be successful at that. I guess to each his own. But I certainly have no interest in throwing in common cause or tossing in shekels amongst the Marxist left who want to use us and come in to take advantage of what we have built. If we have built something outside of that, then it should remain as it is. Let's not give up our hard-earned blood and treasure to people who would turn around and as soon as and they gained any amount of power and slit our throats. Of course, after they kill the liberals and the priesthood.
Yeah, this is another good transition because it really speaks to something I've been saying. And there's this bizarre trend of leftists, many of them blue checked on Twitter and whatnot. This had to come from a top-down message. There's too many people saying it. It's people that never previously discussed libertarianism or acknowledged us. So I find it interesting. And I also find it that it's interesting that they're playing to the libertarian obsession of being consistent. And I think we're the only ones with that obsession. But, and that's these leftists crying out for, where are the libertarians in Portland? Why aren't you up there defending the communists and quote unquote anarchists? I hate using that term for them, but that are being arrested or pulled into these unmarked vehicles by federal police. Because after all, you hate the state, don't you? Well, where are you guys? I'd love to get your thoughts on it. Walk through this with us and how libertarians should view this. Not only what's going on in Portland, but the social media trend of libertarians and gun people being called out for not just marching up there and defending the protesters.
Well, I have no obligation to stand in between you and a rival gang, other than, any more than I have any obligation to stand in between the cartels and the Mexican police in Mexico. So here's the thing: how can I say this? I'm trying to put this as delicately as possible.
You don't have to be delicate.
Maybe I shouldn't. So I guess the way to really look at this is the way my friend Eric July does. And I don't want to copy what Eric July has said, but it is like they are rival gangs, the Feds and the Marxists in Portland. So I would say, first off, that where were the liberals when libertarians were arguing against the Patriot Act and against the NSA spying and against every single civil liberty violation that's occurred in the last 2 or 3 decades here in the United States? The libertarians were always at the forefront, always advocating for it, and Democratic leaders and left-wing leaders were always out there voting for it. And so we were there first, obviously, duh, but that doesn't address the issue that they say now. Where are you now? Where are you now? Well, I agree with Senator Rand Paul that we should not have the feds, the DHS, sent into the states to go and act as law enforcement. That should not be the job of the Department of Homeland Security. If libertarians had their way, there would be no Department of Homeland Security. There would be no DHS. The guy who created the DHS even said the other day they could have never envisioned that when they created it, it would turn into a sort of Praetorian Guard for the President of the United States. So if I had been a U.S. Senator or elected in 2018, then I would have absolutely been decrying this and saying that this is absolutely wrong. We need the states to be able to do it. Now, the states should absolutely do it. The states should absolutely be policing their streets and ensuring that properties is not damaged and it's not being destroyed and that individual rights are being protected. That is the role of government. I will say this, that a lot of libertarians buy into the argument about the 14th Amendment being incorporated into the states, and this being an argument to say that and not only can the federal government not take away these individual rights in the Bill of Rights, but the states can't take away your rights in the Bill of Rights. So in some sense, there may be some argument there to say, hey, listen, if the states are not going to protect the individual rights of the citizens living in these communities, then the federal government is going to protect the rights of the citizens of those things. I think that in an extreme situation like Portland, the National Guard should absolutely be called out. That is what the National Guard is for. And I'm not one of those paranoid schizo libertarians who freaks out every time they see a Humvee on the street, because, I know that there's probably a military base down the street, because we have military bases in the United States. And it's one thing to say, as libertarians, we don't believe in foreign wars, but bring the troops home. Well, if we bring the troops home, where are they going to be? They're going to be here in the United States, and they're going to be on military bases protecting the people of the United States from things like violent anarchists and Marxists looting in Portland. That's probably a good idea for the National Guard to be stopping widespread looting and rioting and burning and pillaging. So you can make any comparisons that you like to other conflicts throughout history. I know that they've said the Boston Tea Party at some point and things like that. And we can quibble about what happened at the Boston Massacre as another example of something we can discuss if you really want to get into the minutia and the nitty-gritty details, although I'm not sure how interested your listeners would be on those things. Because are there hypocrisies? Yes. When you mention consistencies, are there inconsistencies? Yes. Do you have to accept inconsistencies and hypocrisies in order to live a life and not go mad? I think so. I think that probably on some level that it's a good thing that libertarians are uncomfortable with hypocrisies and inconsistencies. But I do think that allowing for inconsistencies to a small degree while still trying to get something done 95% of the time is acceptable, right? Or even maybe if, since we're talking libertarians here at low bar, maybe 5% getting something accomplished and 95% inconsistencies would be preferable to the 0% advancement of libertarian ideas that it almost feels like we have now. If that sounds a little dire or dark, I'm sorry, but the fact is that the best argument against what's happening in Portland right now, to me, are libertarian ideas. But instead, what's happening is that the libertarians, many of them, are buying into the ethos of the social justice warriors, and then by proxy, adopting their language and terminology, thinking that they're changing, that they're moving pieces on the board, when in reality, they're just like, you useful idiots.
Yes, well put. And I keep saying that the people up in Portland that are doing basically tearing parts of the city apart and everything, many of them would have you or I fired from our jobs today if they could do that because of our political beliefs. So I have no interest in going up there to defend those people. They're on their own. They've prayed and worked towards massive government. That's what their whole philosophy entails, and they're getting it a little bit. And we'll see how they like the taste of that. It's stuff we've been warning against for years.
They still deserve their rights, but like you were asking me, I don't have any obligation to go to Portland and defend their rights or their freedoms if I think that they're engaging in behavior that is criminal behavior that's against individual rights. I can say that they should get due process. I should say that they shouldn't have unmarked federal military members or DHS. You shouldn't have feds coming in and snatching you. I could say that process is wrong, but you're not worth me going and dying for. I can say that. You think that not everybody's worth dying for. Not everybody in the world is worth me going and picking up a rifle and going and fighting and dying for. There are certain people in this world that have to go and fend for themselves. North Korea has to go and fend for themselves. I don't feel an obligation to protect absolutely everyone with my life. I reserve that for my family, my friends, and for those who deserve it.
Yeah, and just a humorous version of inconsistency. I saw a progressive posting about this kind of thing that we're talking about, asking us where we are when these federal police go and do this and that. And not 2 posts later, he posted an article on a couple that apparently both tested positive for COVID being under house arrest, and prefaces it with, this is how it should be. This should be, wait for it, a federal law. And I thought, well, wouldn't that be enforced by the federal police that you were supposed to be against just 2 posts ago? And
wait, who said that?
I won't name his name. It's a person that I know personally on social media. And, it's just so interesting to see 1 minute, where are the libertarians? Where are the Second Amendment people? When these feds come and pull up these protesters.
You took their guns. You voted against their guns. They had a 10-day waiting period. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. And then 2 posts later, he wants a federal law to keep people under house arrest if they test positive for COVID.
Yeah. It doesn't surprise me at all. Again, consistencies and inconsistencies, but this is a psychological problem, you see. This is an inability of the public at large to either have access to the knowledge or to accept the knowledge of what is real. And this is called bifurcated thinking. So bifurcated thinking is black or white thinking. There are 2 kinds of people in the world: people who engage in black and white thinking and people who don't. Right? So by engaging in black or white thinking, that psychological that manifests itself in a 2-party system, right? Where you're this or you're that, you're blue or you're red. You got to be if you're for this candidate, you're against that candidate. But the looking at the ideological spectrum, it's much more diverse. It's much more of a rainbow spectrum rather than a simple left-right comparison. I think most people would agree. And if so, then we need better sort of markers in order for people to be able to kind of find their way to libertarianism. But libertarianism faces a much steeper hill just in the simple fact that, libertarians struggle from the same bifurcated thinking fallacies that many other people do. And this comes about because of confirmation bias, which is another psychological phenomenon that we have to fight. Everybody wants to confirm their biases. We want to believe, we read headlines, we want to believe they're true. So we share the headlines, even if they're not true, even if we haven't read the article inside of it. And then even if we get owned, we didn't read the comments that disagreed with us, or we blocked the person that disagreed with us, right? And, that's the echo chamber effect. But that's all a result of bifurcated thinking. That's a result of you're this or you're that. If you like Trump, then you're an evil Nazi traitor fascist, right? If you like Nancy Pelosi, then you're an evil communist, whatever pejorative insert there. But those are psychological phenomenons, and those are psychological phenomenons that are rampant throughout humanity. How do we fight those? Nothing short of a new enlightenment. Maybe if coronavirus causes all of the schools this fall to not open, and if the online virtual learning that they're talking about is as big a cluster, as I predict it will be when the government tries to use technology and they boomer the hell out of it, then maybe this could be the start of a new golden age, because all the parents will suddenly have to take responsibility into their hands for their own kids and their education personally, in which case, well, a little bit of anarchy, maybe that's just what we need. Not the burning and looting and rioting.
Right.
I'm talking about the no schools type of anarchy.
Yes, indeed. Let me tell you guys about another sponsor for today's show, and that is Zotty Coffee. Oh my goodness, it is so damn good. I kid you not, I found myself the last few mornings waking up earlier than normal just because I'm so excited to drink this coffee that the guys sent me. It is so good. Let me tell you about them really quick. They basically import coffee from a roaster in Naples. Well, now they've got it on their website. You can order it. It is so damn good. They've got ground, whole bean, anything you like over there. And trust me, you won't be disappointed. I do it in the French press. That's how I make my coffee every morning. And I'm so stoked to have these guys as a sponsor. They love liberty. They love the Death to Tyrants podcast. And so we should support them, right? We want the good people to get our money. And when you go over to lorenzoti.coffee, that's LORENZOTTI.coffee, and you use our promo code at checkout, DTTP, for the Death to Tyrants podcast, you get 10% off your order. And they are not expensive, guys, but boy, it tastes expensive. You will not be disappointed. Our sponsor, Lorenzotti Coffee, LORENZOTTI.coffee. Go check them out and use promo code DTTP at checkout. You won't be sorry. If you were the presidential nominee for the LP right now, would you take a strong stand on the mask issue and or lockdown issue?
Sure, which would just simply be that, to the best of my knowledge, I believe masks would help mitigate the spread of coronavirus, but I don't think that they should be mandatory. And one of the reasons why is because mask usage actually takes a little to properly use sterile masks and to keep them sterile is probably beyond the task. It's beyond me, and I'm fairly hygienic and I wash my hands a lot. It's probably beyond the normal American to just snap right into proper mask usage that would really, make an impact. I do think that at some levels at best it's a show, but by making it mandating it in public spaces, in effect, they create all of these negative repercussions where business owners suddenly have to become the police, and they're being threatened with losing their business licenses if they don't enforce the new protocols for coronavirus, which can sometimes be arbitrary and be nothing but a show. I just happen to think that business owners and private property owners take better care of their own property and would do a better job at keeping people out and, maintaining social distancing if they didn't want the backlash that'd be associated with, have some kind of event like, there was a Lake of the Ozarks event here in mid-Missouri, but it turned out only, I believe, like 1 or 2 cases ended up coming out of that giant party that everyone was hating on Missouri for and, calling us all sorts of terrible names. So we just don't know enough about the virus yet. And I think it's okay to say when you don't know, or that something might be true, and to not rule anything out. So yeah, I do think that wearing a mask is a good idea. And the reason why is because when I go into big box stores or grocery stores, there are people who don't have the common courtesy to cover their hand, take their hand and cover their mouth when they sneeze or cough. So if you don't know how to do those simple basic rules of etiquette, and a lot of people don't, they should be scolded for, then maybe you ought to be scolded for not wearing a mask if you can't be hygienic enough to cover your stinking hands when you go out in public. I've seen plenty of, people of Walmart, photographs online and, YouTube and TikTok videos of all of the disgustingness behavior, to know that people can be pretty damn unhygienic, and that washing our hands would probably be a good idea. Wearing our masks is probably not a bad idea. But I don't think the government has the authority and should not follow through with making them mandatory, because I think the unintended consequences would place too much of a burden on the type of people who are just trying to survive in a scenario like this.
Do you think there's a large group of people that are basically just wanting to hear from some politician, look, I think you should be allowed to work. I'm not going to lock down your bars or your small businesses, because it seems like there's some mixed messaging from the two big parties. And it could be that there's a prime area for Libertarians or the LP to say, we want you to be able to work. We do not believe in these lockdowns. Do you see that?
I do. And the people who say things like that have a pretty popular following here in my home state of Missouri. Missouri has a Senate conservative caucus who about 6-member caucus at the moment, looking to add 7, I believe, this fall, which are some of them. Tomorrow I'm going to be speaking to a senator who's also a doctor and who said positive things about hydroxychloroquine, which at the moment is embroiled in quite a national controversy, I would say, involving people who promote this drug and then people who think that it should not be promoted, and it should be any promotion of it should be removed from the social media platforms. But I speak to these conservative caucus members about this topic, and they have diverse opinions, but ultimately they agree with me in the sense that we really need a broader minded approach to this. Unfortunately, what seems to be occurring right now is that the public policy officials right now look for very narrow solutions that are one-size-fits-all solutions, and then try and apply them to a large swath of the population. Luckily, in Missouri, my governor, Mike Petersen, has stated that when it comes to schools, for example, the localities should set their own rules. I think that diversified, will be very impactful in terms of overall the impact that it'll have on the state positively. But other solutions that you have offered by public officials are usually restrictive. You have your Andrew Cuomo's, your Gavin Newsom's. They put out edicts which are not law, but which have the force of law, and they're usually very arbitrary. Like, you can't buy chips and drink alcohol. You can eat a sandwich and buy alcohol, right? So very arbitrary. And obviously nothing to do with public health in terms of stemming a pandemic. It's just something that somebody dreamed up in their head. There's no scientific double-blind testing. There's been no years of policy study on whether the impact of drinking alcohol during a pandemic. There's nothing like that. They're just making it up, right? They're making it up as they go along. So dispersing the decision-making on the pandemic, I believe, is the best way to disperse the pandemic, right? So letting these communities come together, who know one another and trust one another, and be able to offer solutions that are tailored to their needs and their desires, and letting these communities make the decisions on what happens to the nursing home or the Veterans Center, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, very complex web, but, the approaches that you see across the United States being patchwork as they are, it's going to be a couple of years until we know who did best. But I'm going to bet on black. I'm going to bet on red. I'm going to bet on the red states. I'm going to bet on the states that took the dispersed approach, that took the localized approach, that those are going to be the ones that are going to weather the storm, barring any unforeseen economic complications that might have existed beforehand. I'm betting my money on the red states, to be able to weather this more effectively than New York or California or other high population states.
Yeah, it's, month by month of 2020 gets crazier and crazier, and this is not exactly some kind of brilliant insight I have, but I suspect something worse could come down the line here in the next few months, whether it be some more violence in the streets or whatnot. You are kind of looked upon as a well-known figurehead within libertarianism. Is there any advice you would give people listening, libertarians listening, to, just what to think going forward? Where should we stand on some of these issues and the like?
So a lot of people have lofty ideals, but not a lot of people are willing to do the work that's necessary to put those ideals into place. And the people, to me, that I think I always have loved being a part of the grassroots, because I have respect for people who do the hard work. A lot of people complain on Facebook and Twitter. Not a lot of those people who will write long Facebook rants will turn those around and craft it into an op-ed, submit it to an editorial process, and then publish it for the world to see. So do the hard work. That would be my advice, is that, there was a surge of interest with Ron Paul, where a lot of people were willing to volunteer and to commit themselves to these institutions. And the energy and the tide, the pendulum, has swung in a different direction against our momentum. The only way that this pendulum is going to go, nothing moves unless it's pushed. Nothing moves unless it's pushed. So unless we get out there and start doing some pushing in just any general direction at all, then if we stay at rest, if we stay at rest, the longer we stay at rest, the harder it's going to be for us to get going again. I've seen a lot of faces approach me, stars in their eyes, saying, I want to do this, I want to do what you do, Austin, I want to do all that. And I'm like, okay, here's what my suggestion is to you. Do this, and this in that order. And you're going to find yourself opened up to a whole new range of opportunities. But frequently those steps are things like take this 6-hour video course, or go to this institute for a week and take their advanced course on, economics, blah, blah, blah. Here, do this, right? You got to do this. And sometimes you even have to spend your own money. And a lot of times you got to work without getting paid. As a matter of fact, most of the work I did for Liberty, I didn't get paid. I've been one of the fortunate people who has gotten paid. But the fact is that I would have never gotten to that point. I would have never gotten the opportunity I have now, the job I have now, if I hadn't put on the overalls and done the hard work that was necessary. So when somebody comes to you with a job, look at that as an opportunity, even if it's unpaid, especially if it's unpaid, because then they don't have the expectations on you that they do when they're paying someone. So if you can exceed someone's expectations and outperform what somebody expects for you to be able to accomplish a task, or maybe even a task on your own, people will be impressed, and you'll advance the ball down the road, not only for the cause, but also for yourself personally, right? If you want to be an activist, and if you want to affect change, and you want to do exciting things and work with exciting people, then you have to be willing to get out in the fields and mow. You got to mow grass for a few days. You got to stuff envelopes. You got to lick stamps. You got to knock on doors. You got to register voters. You got to have petitions signed and do those things first, so that you have the credibility to move up.
Yeah, well put. Well, in closing, I will let you plug away here. Talk about the Libertarian Republic, anything you got online. Where can my listeners follow you?
Yeah, probably the easiest, just my social accounts, which is standardized. It's just AP for Liberty on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So it's AP, the number 4, AP for Liberty. Hit me up there, anywhere there. And of course, my website is thelibertarianrepublic.com. You can check it out. We publish libertarian news and opinions. And if you feel like you've got a strong opinion, you want to submit pieces, then you can hit me up at my socials, and maybe you can be a writer at the Libertarian Republic.
Awesome. Austin Petersen, thank you so much, man. This has been enjoyable. Thanks for being here.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that interview with Austin Petersen. And, usually now is the time where I tell you about all the places you can find me online. Man, I am high tech now. I am so 2020. We've got one place you can find all of it. It is at death2tyrantspodcast.com. Who would have figured? death2tyrantspodcast.com. I've got my own website now. You can listen to episodes there. You can find the Facebook page there. You can find my Instagram page. Some of you guys never knew about that. Some of you sneak through somehow. You find me on Instagram. I've already got some listeners following me. Well, now I'm going to have more. It's got my Twitter link there. It's got all the places to subscribe. It's got our store, which we will be selling t-shirts in soon. It's got it all. So go over to death2tyrantspodcast.com and just check it out. Let me know what you think about the website. And by the way, guys, go visit my sponsors. If it's a small business and it's willing to support a show like this, please give them some business. Thank you guys very much. We will talk soon. See ya.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram wrath. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Death to Tyrants podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.